It needs to be confrontational at times to get the best and to change behaviour. As a coach of a professional rugby team, you have 1,000 difficult conversations a day because that's how we operate. That's what is important to us. If I do it, it means someone else doesn't have to do it. It's a great analogy, coaching and parenting. It's one and the same, really. Those high pressure, extreme expectation environments at big clubs and big teams isn't work experience.
Welcome to Coaching Culture, the podcast about cultivating culture and leadership. I'm Ben Herring and I've been loving this side of the game for bloody ages. Today's guest is Matt O'Connor. Matt is a former Australian international player, been capped for the Wallabies, as well as an ex-rugby league professional player. He finished his playing career in Japan, where he cut his coaching teeth with the Kubota rugby team, before returning to Australia and coaching Australia A and the Brumbies. He went on to become head coach of some of the biggest teams in world rugby. Head coach of the English powerhouse, the Leicester Tigers, where he won the premiership. Head coach of the Irish powerhouse, Leinster, where he won the Pro 12, before returning as head coach to Australia's iconic Queensland Reds. It's been an amazing coaching road that Matt has travelled down as a pro coach, and at times a rocky one, and I believe there's no better person to talk about the real life ins and outs, stresses and strains of professional coaching than Matt. Matt O'Connor, welcome to the Coaching Culture podcast.
Thanks for having me, Benny. Great to be here.
Lovely to have you here, Matt. I will start off right off the bat with you, Matt, is how do you define culture?
Benny, culture's a load of things, obviously, to different people. It's basically, I think, my definition would be how the organisation, team, corporation, you name it, operate and how they go about their business on a day-to-day basis. That's probably the essence of it, and how those people interact, the language they use, the actions, the behaviours, the key things that make that group of people tick, really.
When you say business, does it have any relevance to business? Go about their business?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been in the corporate world for the last probably 6, 7, 8 years, and it's very much a part of that. Not nearly as robust as the professional environments that you and I have both been a part of, but it's still very relevant.
What is the difference, Matt, between corporate world teams versus rugby teams or professional rugby teams or any rugby team?
In one word, I'd have to describe it as the robustness of Benny. And it's very, very different stakes. You know, the corporate world is high pressure and high intensity rather, but you don't get judged every week. You don't get judged by the fans. You don't get judged on social media as frequently, and it's not nearly the same public domain. So from that perspective, it needs to be it needs to be instant, it needs to be confrontational at times to get the best and to change behaviour week to week. Most of the time is the reality.
What sort of behaviours are you looking to change there, Matty, week to week?
In corporate land or in footy?
In footy, is there any, or are we just consistent?
Yeah, there's a bit of consistency, and there's some week to week there could be behaviours, actions, decisions that have an impact on the result, and as a result of that, there needs to be a tweak. You were involved in some fairly robust review meetings post game on a Monday, Benny, and sometimes you need to do that. And if you're talking about being the best and you're talking about winning things, then sometimes there is a need for those behaviours to be adjusted, altered, moved pretty rapidly.
It's a very unique environment, isn't it? The way you speak in a rugby team, and probably a lot of professional teams, is very different to the way you might talk to people in everyday life, right? There's an edge at times at that upper echelon.
Yeah, there's a lot of tears in corporate land if you apply that approach.
A lot of tears.
Well, no, there can be, Benny, depending on who you're dealing with. But yeah, I mean, it's really important. It's really important to have that connection. If you've got that connection with people and your motives aren't questionable, and it's all, what's the best way to describe? If it's all delivered in a team first mantra, then you wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of people would be surprised with what you can get away with.
We were just
Because
talking.
if it is framed in that team first, and it's not ego based, and it's all about making the collective better, then it's taken in the right frame, and you've got the connections that build the social capital, that that everyone's on the same page, everyone's contributing, everyone wants to get better, everybody wants to win. So from that perspective, I think you've got to have that level of direct robustness and reality to what you're talking about.
When you say the word social capital, what does that refer to?
What does it refer to? It probably means, I would describe it as the layering of that connection with people that allows a little bit more honesty, a little bit more robustness, because everyone's working for the same goal, everyone's fighting for the same thing, and if you've got that connection, social capital that you've built up over months, years, decades, people are going to try a little bit harder. People are going to be a little bit more committed to that cause if they've got that connection and social capital.
Do you think it gives you a little bit more leeway as a coach too to speak
most definitely? Yeah, and I think it comes back to the motives, Benny. Like, as long as you, the leader, the coach, is unquestionable in his motives, and it's not an ego-based situation, and the players and the staff understand that this is all for the betterment of the group, then, as I said earlier, you'd be amazed at what you can get away with. And it's not obviously getting away with it. It's the reality of of how you can actually structure that message that is robust and direct. There's a lot of commentary now around leaders in whatever sphere they're in is having difficult conversations. And as a coach of a professional rugby team, you have 1,000 difficult conversations a day.
We were just talking off air on this about the rugby environment is one where swearing at the right time and right place, if you've built enough social capital, can be a very effective tool as a coach, where in other professions, particularly the corporate world, it's almost never going to work, is it? It's always going to be received poorly, whereas in this industry...
Yeah, well, there's obviously different scales of what's acceptable and what different levels of etiquette there are. But, I mean, you were in Japan. The funny thing about swearing, even with an interpreter in Japan, the interpreter wouldn't swear, but they would understand, the Japanese players, when foreign coaches are swearing, that it added meaning to what needed to be done.
Yes, it is. What do you call that? Enhancing language.
Yeah.
Strong. It makes an adjective even better.
Get more powerful, yeah.
Certainly wouldn't work in the schooling context, I don't reckon, Matt.
No, and I did a bit of stuff with the school in Canberra this year, and they have very much a non-swearing policy. That was there was a bit of biting of lips and bits and pieces at stages, but yeah, the kids are great, and they operate like the same as you would in the classroom on the footy field, and I think that's really good for them.
Yeah. Now, Matty, you've coached all over the world, mate. Now, what are some of the best team cultures you've been part of?
Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly lucky, coaching wise, to be in very, very successful world class environments. As you said, went from Kubota, where we were brand new, to the top league, and that was an evolution of what happened there, to the Brumbies, to the Tigers at Leicester, and then Leinster, and then the Reds. And yeah, I mean, phenomenal. I mean, the things that drive those are, there wouldn't be a lot of difference, Benny, between when you break it all down. There's obviously differences around how things go together, but the Brumbies, Tigers and Leinster, very, very similar around things like extreme expectation, around winning, and that's what we are here to do, and we need to work as hard as we can to achieve that. Things like accountability, Like everybody was really, really accountable in those environments. And that was from the kit man to the physio to the junior players to the captain to the coaches. And everybody had a responsibility to make sure that they delivered on their bits as well as they could possibly do that. So, those sorts of things, and very, very honest and robust, Benny. There was guys like at the Brumbies, George Gregan, Sterling Mortlock, Matt Giddo, George Smith, like around what you had to deliver, and the things like junior guys coming into those environments who haven't played a game of Super Rugby, but they get a really good understanding very, very early around what has to happen, and the improvement piece for those three environments, and especially this hit home very much at Tigers, and you were there at the time, Benny, when I joined. And the guys that I came across, loads of test players, blokes that have won World Cups, and to a man, they were interested in being better and changing the things that they had done for 2, 3, 4, their whole career, were open book around, if that is going to make us better, we're more than happy to adopt it. And the same at Leinster. When I turned up at Leinster, guys like O'Driscoll and Jamie Heaslip and Sean O'Brien and Leo Cullen, they just wanted to get better, and they saw personality and the change in coach and the different bits and pieces as an opportunity to keep what had built those really strong cultures, but also as an opportunity to change the things that they had been doing, because there's no perfect rugby team, and without the ability to adjust, you get those very, very good teams, especially with the level of scrutiny and technology in the game now, they get caught really quick. So, you need to be forever adjusting how you're doing it, growing what you do, changing things for the better. And that some of that's the cultural piece, off field standard bits. Some of that's the mechanics around how you play and what what your game actually looks like. But yeah, I mean, I was very, very fortunate to be in those environments where every single year we were a chance to win the competition. And that's what I thoroughly enjoyed, the performance of it, and making the players better, growing their currency as a player, and trying to be as successful as we could.
How did you, with that extreme expectation, how do you drive a culture where that extreme expectation, where there's that drive to be better from the players? How do you help foster that, particularly in environments where it's not, when you're not winning, like say club level stuff? How do you get that in everyday coaching, an environment or a culture where the players are doing that? Not every team has a George Gregan or a Martin Corrie that drives such good standards.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge, and that's probably the thing where I didn't need to drive that as much because of those incredibly leader-rich environments that I was in. I sort of took that for granted, Benny, if that makes sense. And although, and you were a part of some of those environments as a player and as a coach, I mean, you certainly buy into it. It's a huge part of the process around driving those leaders. The interaction was the important bit with those incredibly good leaders. It wasn't necessarily an education piece. The other environments that I've been involved with, the Reds is a good one, where they had some senior players that were on the move, but they had a very young group of players. So you've got to invest in the leadership piece. Have to sit down with them, because at the end of the day, as powerful as the staff and the coaching group around driving those messages and driving what has to happen on the field, but also those key behaviours, actions, language off the field around how we get this group to move forward. And you can't underestimate it. I would stress, and I don't want to overplay it, but the honesty and the real bit is really important, and the integrity from those guys and the empowerment of those leaders in your own individual environment, you've got to get right, because if you don't, it's like a tick and a cross. It's like every time there's a positive involvement from the leaders and the group, that helps us win on Saturday. Every time there's a negative in and around that conversation, in and around those behaviours, in and around those dialogue, well, then that has the potential to impact on Saturday as well. So it's really important that you are, as the leaders of that, from a staff perspective, educating, driving, mentoring that leadership group, because that's going to help the organisation moving forward, but it's also going to help in training. It's also going to help in the environment. It's also going to help Saturday on Saturday on Saturday.
I love that, mate. I think it's, when you're talking about this leader-rich environments, I love that phrase you said, that it's about sometimes the interactions you have with the leaders, because you can't always get through the leaders on the technical stuff, but you can always have those interactions. You can always, as a coach, be honest and real. And that goes back to building that social capital that you talked about. If you're prepared to actually have interactions, good ones, with integrity and genuineness with your leaders, it builds that social capital, and then they commit and they assist and they drive and they improve expectations and the culture and the performance as a result.
And it's as simple as this, Ben. Like, if you're dealing with your line out caller and you've practiced X amount of line outs in the week, there's going to be, if you don't engage them and give them ownership of the process at the front end of the week, and this is what we're going to do, you can waste half the week practicing stuff that the line out caller is never going to call, that he's not comfortable with. Now, that's really inefficient. And no different with a back line, and or the guy who runs the attack. If you think there's all these amazing things we can do, but the leader of that and the caller of that doesn't buy into that because he doesn't believe it and hasn't got the ownership of, then you wasted half your week. And there's a lot of people who'll be listening that the professional week is a really short week, and you don't have a lot of time to get stuff physically done, because it's you're going from week to week to week. So you really got to maximise those interactions, and you got to sit down and talk to the leaders. Because, as we know, everybody's got stuff going on in the background. So you don't want to have a situation where, one or two of your leaders are off kilter because they've just got a new baby or their parents are ill, or some of those things in the background that have a huge impact on us personally. You need to be across so that you can help maneuver that in any given week. I mean, it's going to change, isn't it?
Oh, I love it, mate. And I think you talked about, not only is it a wasted week sometimes, but it's also a little bit of lost social capital too, if you've gone and done it.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And then you're depleting your bank of social capital, which
Correct.
You don't want to be doing.
No, and I was fortunate, and I say that hand on heart. The guys that I had the pleasure of coaching all go to my story, and I coached some unbelievably good footballers, but special humans at the same time. And the lot of that stuff is done from the change room to the training pitch, in the lunchroom, in the having a coffee, all of that informal combination connection builds so much of that social capital. And it's very, very important to be as present as you can in those encounters, because there will be a lot of social capital, if we want to use that word, built in and around those.
Is there a difference between who you're talking to, Matty? Like if you're speaking to these leaders or the senior players and experienced pros versus your younger players or your academy players or anyone coming through, Do you lead them differently, especially around sort of the way you chat, the accountability and the standard side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the easiest way to define that, Benny, would be a lot of the time, the the kids coming into the environment or the young men coming into the environment don't understand the expectation. So the early part, now some of that's recruitment, some of that's done before they get in the door, and that's why they get in the door. But you've got to make sure that you explain the expectation. This is what is required of you, Ben Herring, as a player in this environment. And the senior players, the very, very good ones, and the guys like the Jordan Murphys and and Dan Coles and the George Fords and the Toby Floods and the Aaron Majors at Leicester, exceptional at that, because they've come in. You've got a responsibility as a young player. You want to be really, really good. If you want to be really, really good, you get in the door. As soon as you get in the door, you're a part of this thing, but you've got to contribute. So it's important to explain that expectation. The more senior guys, the internationals, the guys that have played 50 games for the club, they understand that expectation. So it's more manoeuvring as opposed to setting out, this is what is required of you. My experience was very much, once that expectation is explained, guys will try and do that. They won't actually execute on it every day, but they will try and execute on it. And that's what you want out of a coach is this is what we're trying to achieve. Everyone's trying to achieve that. There's no questions around anyone's effort or attitude or motivation to do that. Young players are going to make errors. They're going to get it wrong. They're going to get stuff wrong off the field because they're young men, and you've just got to be there to support those errors in judgment. And as we know in life, so much of the betterment is off the back of errors. And we've all learnt that lesson the hard way.
Well, we'll go straight into that, Matty. What's your errors, mate? What's your mistakes you've learned from in this industry and role that coaches would benefit from?
Yeah, good question. Good question. I mean, big clubs. So let's talk Leicester and Leinster. Big clubs. I was probably coaching too much. See, I was responsible for the defence. I was responsible for the attack, big hand in what was going on from a unit perspective. And then there's the added load of the management piece and the media piece and managing the academy from a distance, obviously. So I needed to delegate better in those environments. And some of that was an error in judgment by me. Some of that was relative to trying to protect some of the younger coaches that were in that environment that were going to be very, very good coaches, but I didn't necessarily want their name associated to a discipline, because as soon as the discipline doesn't work with social media and the way that the world works, is that they're going to be on the hook to be moved on. And that probably wasn't fair to them. I was big and ugly enough and I could cope with that. So that was a mistake. The lack of delegation, Bennett, around empowering others, but it's a really high pressure environment. And in saying that, look, I never perceived it as working. It was a dream for me. I came out of the amateur era as a player. So like, I left school late 80s. I was going to be a PE teacher and coach the first 15, Benny. Like that was the dream. And you're probably just young enough to know that was the way the game was. And then rugby goes pro and everybody goes, wow. So from that perspective, it was a dream run, really. And to be in some of those iconic environments, people would say some of the world's best rugby environments for obviously what they've achieved. But it was never working. It was never stress. It was never pressure. You knew what you were required to do and you went about it. The reality is that, and there's not many jobs now that can get away with it, that you potentially got a board and you've got a CEO and they wake up on the wrong side of the bed and they change their mind, or you have a significant loss to a rival that you didn't necessarily think you were going to lose to, or whatever it is. And that's the game. It was never a burden, if you like, is probably the best word. It was get up, do your best, get the blokes to work hard, get them to buy in, and make sure that their commitment was there. They were doing the right things in the week, and they were playing for each other on a Saturday. Well, then you're ticking the boxes.
Do you think that delegation piece is a classic coaching trap where a lot of coaches tend to try to take it all on themselves? And have you got better at it?
I've been really coaching since then. So I don't know whether it's in hindsight, I've learnt those lessons. Let's stick with this one, and then I'll get to a managing up question. Just remind me of managing up, Benny. But I in hindsight, I should have delegated more. But there was the protection piece, there's the quality of, there's the delivery of, there's all those sorts of things. And the way I would describe it is that those high pressure, extreme expectation environments at big clubs and big teams isn't work experience. So it's really, and we touched on a little bit earlier, the tiny windows you have week on week to make sure things are exactly right. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one.
And how do you manage up? What's the issues and problems and associated things with the managing up concept?
And I off the back of a couple of conversations that I had post coaching, there was a couple of comments made to me by people that I would respect that, Matty, you needed to do a better job of managing up. And by managing up, we're talking about key decision makers in that organisation. So board members, CEO, those sorts of personalities. And at the end of the day, Benny, I sort of went, I'm not managing up. And you've had the misfortune of being in environments with me. I'm not about, if someone in the environment isn't team first, if someone, and that could be up or down, doesn't matter. If we're not all on the same page, it's too hard to be fighting internally and managing up. Like you can't manage up if people's motivations and intentions aren't for the best outcome and aren't, at the end of the day, team first. So in hindsight, I wouldn't change a thing. I'm really comfortable with, like I said, with every experience I've had in the game, from winning trophies to getting sacked. Like, there's not a thing I'd change, Benny. And I think I'm really comfortable with where I am with the game and the integrity that I held in the game.
Yeah, mate, and that's an important one. Mate, you've had some amazing highs. You've won the best trophies in the world, but you've also had that other extreme of pro coaching, is that you have been sacked, like you said. How's that experience, mate? Like, that weighs on a lot of coaches, whatever level you're at, that pressure or that fear of getting kicked out, essentially. How did you deal with it, and how would you advise coaches going forward to experience that kind of thing?
Yeah, look, as I said, like it was never a job for me, Benny. It was just what I was and what I did and all of those things. So from that perspective, it was never a burden. And that's with 3 kids and a wife and traveling around the world, which you do forget sometimes. And that is the thing that actually grounds you in and around that, because what happens to you personally is one thing, but the emotional kick that the family receive is really, really hard around being sacked. But you can't approach it that way. I never perceived it to be a job. I wasn't a career coach to have a job. I was coaching because I wanted to win stuff. I loved it. It was a massive rush for me to be in those environments and to be at the pointy end of the game. Unfortunately, I think the pointier the end, the sharper the fall.
Yeah.
You know, it's for the coaches out there, it's a part of the game, you know. And, you know, people, you know, you hear the commentary, whether it be cricket, whether it be soccer, whether it be football, whether it be rugby, and you know, you hear the commentary from the punters, like, why it's the players' responsibility. Why don't we get rid of the players? It's not the coach's fault. Well, no, but the logistics of getting rid of the coach and the hope by that very, very smart group of people, from the CEO to the board members who know all, you know, change their mind. And, you know, they're responsible for manoeuvring and governing that organisation. So there has to be a perceived change. And you know, sometimes that's for the better. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes there's deeper issues than the coach or a couple of players that needs fixing and monitoring.
Do you reckon there's a degree in that managing up statement you talked about, you know, building that social capital there as well? We talked about it as with the playing squad that you're in. Do you think there's advice to coaches that's if you don't want to be sacked as easily, that building that social capital with the management up, the people that make the calls, is an important thing to be aware of?
Yeah, I think the example of that, Benny, is probably the guys that have come through that environment and have a connection as players to that environment. And we see it a lot in this country with rugby league and AFL. You know, the homegrown coach who then goes on to be a part of that has that really solid foundation around relationships, around social capital, around connections on a social level with a lot of the board members, a lot of the key power players, CEOs, and that will give them 12 months or 2 years, even when things aren't fantastic. And that's human nature. That's no different to a family business or a company, you know, that you know, people who've got a long-standing relationship with, they're going to get away with a little bit more because they mean a little bit more to the organisation. And unfortunately, professional sport is no different to that.
It's really interesting. It's a cool concept because I hear a lot of coaches that are coming through the ranks that have worked their way up sort of the amateur route, often complaining about how these ex-players sort of leapfrogging me, and just like, I've been working for 10 years slogging out these lower levels and not getting anywhere. Then a player finishes and they're straight in. And the answer to that probably, well, in light of what we're talking about, is they've built that social capital with the organisation. The organisation has a lot of, you know, deep-rooted understanding of that player, and they've built that social capital. So then they're comfortable. You can jump in here and start learning on the job. Whereas for anyone else who hasn't got that capital built up, yeah, you might need
it's harder.
It's harder.
Oh, and the other thing is too, the dynamics and the mechanics of the professional game is slightly different to the amateur game as well. So they would be comfortable that a guy understands the professional environment. He's been dealing with a professional environment for X amount of years as a player. So he's not necessarily going to be disadvantaged in that step, Benny, like someone coming out of school, club, community may be. But yeah, it's all relationships. It's what makes the world work, isn't it?
Yeah. Maddie, have you always desired to be a coach, or has it just evolved post playing?
Yeah, it was always in there. It was so my journey was, I did an education degree, Benny, and then didn't really want to work. So did another degree and did a sports coaching degree. And that sort of allowed me to work as hard as I could off the field on being as good a player as I could be. I was fortunate enough, late 80s, early 90s, to be a part of the AIS program where the Australian Institute of Sport had rugby as a part of it. So there was a load of development in that. And like I said, the education and then the coaching study was to be a PE teacher and play footy and coach the first 15. That was that. Then from thrust into it really at, well, the amateur piece was a very, very different beast in the sense that you were in control of your own development. The coaching bit was not nearly the same detail and time and specifics. So you had to be your own coach, if that makes sense, Benny, to grow and make sure that you developed the best you could as a player. So that led to approaching a little bit differently, and then involved in different leadership capacities through my playing career. And then, which I said earlier, when I lobbed up to the Kubota Spears, they had just been moved into the top league. So that is where I got my first taste of out and out coaching. And that was sort of late 20s, where I was responsible for coaching the backs and then ultimately head coach while still playing at Kubota. And that was phenomenal from a learning perspective, from evolving, having to deal with the language barrier and the cultural issues and all the things that go with that. It only added to the enjoyment of, in hindsight. It was an unbelievable experience, and we did 6 years at Kubota. It was phenomenal in relation to learning how to coach. Because as you know, you got 60, 70, 80 full-time just about athletes that you're responsible for. So from that perspective, you very, very rarely, even in professional environments, you get that level of scope to modify behaviour, drive culture, change the way we play, change the way we think, all of those things. And, you're learning all the time, and you're trying to deliver the best outcome for this group of people and this company, that most of their people involved in rugby had been in Division 4, Division 3, Division 2, and now finally in the top league, and now they're doing unbelievable things. So, it's as I said, everybody on that journey has had a huge part in shaping, me as a coach and as a person.
Anyone stand out that shaped you?
Oh, the old man probably was really important, and Dad didn't play a game of rugby in his life. He was rugby league through and through, but what he did understand was you got to be better, and this is how you win. And from that perspective, not as supportive as he could have been at different stages, but very real and very robust in his in his appreciation of the game. And Benny, the biggest influence probably on me as a player, and then obviously I transitioned that into coaching. Beres Elwood, who was a very, very good Wallaby in the his early 60s. I was fortunate enough to go to school with Beres's young bloke, Jim, and he coached us for 7 or 8 years. We lost from under 8s to first 15. We lost one game of footy. And he was a huge part of that because we could be winning by, and a guy, I ran into an old guy a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "Oh, you're that Matt O'Connor. I still remember the halftime speech. You were playing against my son. He was at Darramarlin, and it was 44-0, and Beres was berating you guys at halftime." And I said, "Yeah, no, that sounds about right." And it was just about being better and the standards that you live by. And Beres was pretty robust with us, but we knew his motives. And, he was phenomenal around doing what's right. And you see it a lot in junior footy now. And the example that stands out to me it wasn't that particular day, but we had a 3-man overlap. I dummied about on the halfway, broke the tackle, ran under the sticks and scored. Thought I was awesome. And Beres said, "Mate, you got to pass that." And I was going, what do you mean I got to pass that? I scored under the post. He said, "You scored under the post today, but when it really, really matters, you might not score under the posts, and that could be the difference between winning and losing." And that was an unbelievable lesson around you've got to get your process right. You've got to make sure that you're doing all the right things all the time. And I certainly took that into my coaching, Benny, and into my playing career because, well, from a skill perspective in training, you'll see guys actually make the wrong decision but still get a positive result. But you've got to wind that back a little bit because there'll be a time where you make the wrong decision and you don't get the result, and we all lose.
Oh, yeah. Mate, that's awesome. It certainly sets you up for a winning mindset when you only lose one game in about 13 years of playing high school rugby. Incredible.
Yeah. No, it was a special team.
Mate, you actually said something earlier there, which I think it's a really unique thing. You said you talked about that amateur mindset just before, and it was a really unique time period that you grew up in, where the amateurs you have to teach yourself. You have to be your own coach, you said. And I like that as a concept because you get to be different or unique and find your own way, whereas you could argue in a lot of ways that with the advent of professionalism and the rise of more coaches that you get a little bit more spoon-fed in a professional environment. We get told exactly what to do this, this is the system of structure, this is what you need to do. Whereas in the amateur era, you sort of got left to yourself and you sort of had to think about it. What worked for you? How can you get better? What really resonates with the way you do things? And I think a lot of coaches that have come from the area, like yourself, are very practical. You think about it and you work it out for what's contextually there rather than just following this is the way that we've done it for a gazillion years.
Yeah,
do you think that's valid?
100%. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids going into those environments now, they very much think that it's a conveyor belt. And at those good environments, there's a huge imparting of knowledge around the senior players and the academy players and the young players around this is not going to happen for you. Just because you pull on this shirt does not mean you are going to be all the things that you want to be. I mean, the conversation in a recruitment sense, Benny, is very much for the ones that I would have would be, how good do you want to be? How good do you want to be? And how hard are you prepared to be good? So I think before people come in the door, you've got to be having those conversations. When they sit down in front of you, I would be very much around, you have to own your development. You have to own it. Don't come into this environment and think because you get a tracksuit and because you're getting paid and you get a free lunch that you're going to be good. That's not how it works. You have to work incredibly hard and you need to be doing the right things, asking the right things, adjusting the behaviours that really matter so that you can be as good as you can be. And that's what I learned out of the amateur era, is that if you want to be good, you need to find the people that can help you be good, and then you need to be the driver of that development. And it's no different. And off the back of, some personal relationships that I have with guys now, I've done a little bit of mentoring with their kids, and that's the message. You sit down with them and they think that they're in a professional environment, that it's all now, that's the hard bit. Whereas, but the academy coach said X and Y, and you have to own it It's your growth. It's your career. You need to own that development as best you can.
I love that, mate. Be the driver of your own development, because I'm certainly seeing that too in the younger kids coming through, thinking just because you made the A team, you just can sit back and it'll all be taken care of. And then the question which I often hear is when young players talking to me about what I need to do, and you say, well, what do you think? And they go, I don't know. And for me, that's a red flag around, well, if you're not aware enough to understand that you need to get faster or bigger, then you're just going through the motions. You're just on that conveyor belt, just happy to go for the ride. And that's what we don't want with our teams. I love it when a player's like doing a drill. They've thought about a drill and you go over and go, what are you doing before training? They go, oh, I did this in the weekend. I wasn't happy with it. So I've designed this drill to replicate that. And now I'm putting it into practice. And if I rep it enough, it won't happen again. And you go, that's the kid.
Correct.
That's going to go well, because they're thinking, they're aware, they're owning their own development. They're not just asking me, the coach, and saying, what could I do better?
Correct.
Mate, give a little bit to own it. Own this thing.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we spoke about those environments and there's loads of blokes, but Richie McCaw is the standout in owning his development. He's the AB's captain, but the evolution in his game from debut to World Cups was phenomenal, because he wasn't happy with how good he was here, and he could have very easily been. He was the best 7 in the world, but he grew and grew his leadership and grew his understanding and grew his ball carry and his jackal threat, whatever it was. He just owned his development and drove it to the nth degree.
I think that's absolute, and just talking about him specifically, I think the best players in the world, the day the season ends, they already know what they're doing in the off season. They have it mapped out, because there's little things which they weren't able to do, like get faster necessarily, and they already know the day that season ends, they're working towards getting better for the next, and you don't need to tell them. They're away. I need to get bigger, faster, quicker. That's my off season. Can't wait. Excited.
And if they don't see that, you're right, Benny. That is a red flag, because you can explain the expectation all you like, but if they don't see it, they won't be able to own it. And we've all played and coached freaks that don't think that too much about it and don't worry too much about the finite detail, because they've got a very, very specific athletic profile, mostly, that allow them to do things on the footy field that you or I could never do. But most 9 out of 10 guys, if they can't make that connection to their development, how can they be better? How do they need to evolve their game? Then it's definitely a red flag.
I think the Richie McCaw example is a brilliant one. I was in the generation, what a generation to be an upside flanker is, to be stuck behind a guy like that who played 147 games for the All Blacks and never got injured. Well, he did get injured a lot, but he worked out deliberately how to get through those injuries. But I think he is the example, because he was a freak of a player, of course, but being like playing against them a lot, you just saw him evolve the whole time. Every season there was a new bit to his game. He was deliberate, he was dedicated, he was focused, and he took action the whole time. It was a calculated thing. In his autobiography, he talks about writing the checklist of where he needed to get to in each season before he even made it, and there was heaps of them. And you're just thinking, that's what, as coaches, we need to drive and promote and celebrate those sort of attitudes in our players, because that's what makes it. Like, yes, he was a good player, but he was a good player because of all those things. If he just turned up at the first 15 at Otago Boys when he made it and just said, sweet, I can just sit back now because I've made this, not a chance he would have even been a professional player. But he had that inner drive, that awareness, that focus, all those things which are values that we as coaches need to be really celebrating in individuals and highlighting them so other people can see it, right?
And that is massive in relation to those environments, though, Benny. Like that filtered through the Crusaders, that filtered through the ABs, the diligence of a Gregan and the work ethic of a Jamie Heaslip and the guys like Tom Youngs and Ben Youngs in the Tigers environment. That has a huge impact on the people in the environment, seeing those behaviours, having those conversations with those leaders around how they go about their business. And there is a huge, really good example of that would be Adam Ashley Cooper in the Brumbies environment who came into the environment as a 19-year-old kid and was a phenomenal athlete, incredibly tough. But the lessons that he learnt in and around being a better player, the diligence, the professionalism, what is required to win things, you can't underestimate the power that has trickling through the environment.
Yeah, mate, it's massive, mate. It's a really big one. And what happens once you get a generation doing it and they feed it to the next, it becomes this. That's the sort of conveyor belt culture you want. You want the values or the individual values that are coming through to be the thing, the legacy you're leaving behind, right?
And that becomes very, very easy from a recruitment perspective. If you are fortunate enough to be in one of those really high-performing environments, the kids jumping over themselves to be a part of it. And that's where you really that's where it becomes significantly easier because we all know those environments. It doesn't matter what sport it is. You can tell that those environments are going to get the best out of individuals. So, whether it be agents, whether it be parents, whether it be the athletes themselves, you want to be a part of that because you're going to get exposed to those really important, high-performing behaviours every single day. So it's a huge advantage.
I'll go one step further, Maddie, and just say that, it's probably not just the high-performing units as well. I'll really go diverse, and I'll go, let's take the example of a family unit. Now, we don't want our kids as parents, we don't want our kids just going through the motions, just doing whatever mum and dad says and say, only doing something when asked, like only doing the dishes when I specifically say, do the dishes. We want the kids to be aware enough of themselves, and we might have to guide that as parents. We might have to say, hey, look, who do you think is going to have to clean up those dishes when we go? Is that what we do as a family? Is that going to get you better? What happens when you move out of home and you have to do this yourself? Yeah. And you highlight these reasons why to try and get the values in. So then as it goes, they're not just waiting for you to ask. They actually do the dishes automatically. They do those little things. Just like in a rugby environment, we want players to actually know what they have to do to get better and go do them. Just like we want our kids to know that that's a thing they have to do for themselves and the family. So they just go and do it.
Correct. That becomes second nature because that's how we operate. That's what is important to us. If I do it, it means someone else doesn't have to do it, and it's no different on the footy field. It's a great analogy, Benny, coaching and parenting. It's one and the same, really.
Yeah. Well, I just think on that habits, mate. Like someone told me the other day that habits are hard to break, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah.
So you might as well get some really good ones, which are then hard to break. And the reference was going to the gym. A buddy of mine was just saying, I've got into this habit of going to the gym. Now I'd hate missing the gym. Yeah. And you just go, man, that's cool. That's a cool example. And same in our teams, right? Any sort of teams is build great habits. So then the players have that for their whole career, whether you're the coach or otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Matty, we have got to that time where the last 20 minutes, mate, it's been flown by, mate. So the last question that we ask on the show is this one. What is one belief that you hold about coaching or culture that you believe in that you reckon other coaches or your contemporaries would disagree with?
I don't know if they would disagree with it. I mean, and we talked about it briefly, is the robustness, Benny, around the delivery of important messages. I think as we said at the start, you've got to wrap it around a connection with the players. You've got to wrap it around the motives. You've got to wrap it around a lack of ego, and you've got to shape it around team first and what those standards are. But you got to have real, robust, honest conversations in environments. I think if you're going to move forward, I think that's the key bit. And I would be critical in some of those environments that I was a part of. There's coaches and staff in those environments that aren't as honest and robust as they should be. It's really confusing and misleading for players. It's a pretty cutthroat place, professional sport. So the last thing you want to be doing is going down a rabbit hole that isn't actually going to help you be a better person, better player. And unfortunately, if you're not having that robust, direct conversation around what has to happen, then that's where ambiguity comes in. There's a level of greyness, there's a level of confusion, which is all counterproductive to being in the moment and performing when it really, really matters.
Matty O'Connor, what a pleasure to have you on the Coaching Culture podcast, my friend. If I may, just to wrap this up, I'd like to give my 3 takeaways that I've got out of the show today, if you don't mind. Number 1 is your opening statement around the social capital context and this phrase, build your social capital. If you've built social rapport, the connection, through a team-first set of ethics, it does 2 things. One, it commits the group way better to the cause and to you. And 2, it gives you leeway to have what you talked about here, this robust discussion, and to be direct and to speak openly and candidly because you've built the social connection, that social capital, which allows you to do it. And I think it's a great one to really highlight for coaches that building the social capital is as important as coaching the technique and the tactics. Number 2.
I'll just interrupt, Benny. I suppose what I didn't say is it gives them a safe place if that exists. So that robustness exists in that level of safety is probably what I didn't articulate well enough.
I love it, mate. I love it. Well, we'll keep going. Number 2 for me, which stood out, was this concept of interact with your leaders. And it's a really good one because sometimes we as coaches feel like we always have to educate, but sometimes particularly in leader-rich environments, just the interacting with leaders, being honest and real and acting with integrity around them builds that social capital. And it's as simple as just an interaction with them. You do that, they commit, they assist, they drive, and they help improve your environment. So just never forgetting that an interaction is a massive thing you can do for your leaders. And number 3 is this concept of owning your own development. We talked about this amateur mindset where in the olden days you had to be your own coach. You had to do it yourself because there wasn't this abundance of coaches giving you the advice and effectively spoon feeding you. And as a result, you often became different, unique, and you found your way. And we got to understand that we don't want our players to think they're just on a conveyor belt and they're just turning up and going through the motions because they think it's going to work. That's not how it is. We want our players to be the driver of their own development, and they need to be aware enough and they need to take feedback with a grain of salt and just understand themselves. And the more we as coaches can help drive that value and that mindset in players, the better they're going to be as players, as people, as teammates, as husband, wives, friends, family, all of that stuff. Matty O'Connor, what an absolute pleasure to have you on the Coaching Culture podcast today.
Thanks, Ben.